The Mariana Trench is not inspiring. It's a cold, lightless, crushing abyss that exists as a quiet rebuke to our species' arrogance. We talk about conquering Everest. We talk about planting flags on the moon. But nearly 7 miles down in the western Pacific Ocean, the Earth is still completely indifferent to us. The Mariana Trench doesn't care about our rockets, our billionaires, or our blue check marks, and that precisely is why it matters. The Mariana Trench stretches more than 1,500 miles long, just east of the Mariana Islands. At its deepest point, Challenger Deep, the seafloor sinks to nearly 36,000 feet below sea level, which is insane. If you drop Mount Everest into it, the peak would still be more than a mile underwater. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is geometry. And geometry doesn't care about your feelings. And here's where I get edgy. We romanticize space exploration while largely ignoring the alien world beneath our oceans. We pour hundreds of billions of dollars into Mars rovers and lunar bases. Meanwhile, more than 80% of our ocean remains unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. Just think about that, man. Like, wow. We can live stream from orbit, but we can't tell you with certainty, like, what species live at the bottom of our own planet. That is not just ironic. It's kind of embarrassing. Humans have only reached the bottom of Challenger Deep a handful of times. In 1960, it was done by Don Walsh and Jack Picard. Then nothing for decades after that. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron made a solo descent in his deep sea Challenger submersible. Then more recently, explorer Victor Vizcaba repeated the feat. But that's it. A place covering a trench longer than the distance from New York to Miami has been physically visited fewer times than the surface of the moon. Just let that sink in. And yet, every time we go down there, we find something that shatters our assumptions. At depths where pressures exceed 16,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human body instantly, life still exists. Translucent snailfish glide along the water column. Amphipods scuttle across the sediment. Strange jellyfish pulse in bioluminescent flashes. These creatures don't just survive, they thrive. They've adapted at a molecular level. Their proteins engineered by evolution to resist pressures that will shatter us like glass. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable, right? When scientists sampled sediment at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, they found microplastics. Even in the deepest, darkest crevice of the planet, where sunlight has never reached and no human city stands, our garbage actually made it there first. We didn't conquer the trench, we contaminated it. That's the uncomfortable reality of the Anthropocene. There is no untouched wilderness left. We've left our fingerprints in the Hadal Zone. Plastic fibers from synthetic clothing, chemical pollutants, persistent organic compounds that erode ocean currents like silent stowaways. The Mariana Trench is often framed as the last frontier. In truth, it's the last receipt. Now let's zoom out. The trench didn't form because Earth wanted to scare us. It exists because of plate tectonics, right? Because the Pacific plate is being forced beneath the smaller Mariana plate in the violent grinding process called subduction. One slab of Earth's crust dives beneath another and sinks into the mantle. It's a planetary recycling system. Mountains rise, trenches fall. Earth reshapes itself without consultation. And here's a thought most people don't like. The same forces that created the Mariana Trench are responsible for some of the most destructive earthquakes and tsunamis on the planet. Subduction zones store enormous amounts of energy. When that energy releases, coastlines pay the price. We build cities on the edge of these systems, and then we act shocked when the bill comes due. The trench isn't just a hole, it's a warning. Now let's talk about pressure, because this is where things get almost philosophical. At the bottom of Challenger Deep, pressure reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. Every square inch of your body will be squeezed by the equivalent weight of 50 jumbo jets. Like, steel spears buckle, electronics fail, windows must be thick acrylic domes engineered with obsessive precision. In that environment, the human body is irrelevant. Evolution didn't design us for that depth. And yet we keep trying to go there. Why? Curiosity, yes. Scientific value, sure. But there's also ego. There's a deep, almost primal need to say, we sent, we saw, we survived. It's the same instinct that drives climbers up Everest and astronauts into orbit. We want to stand somewhere that no one else has ever stood and claim a tiny bit of permanence in a universe that promises none. And here's the irony. The Mariana Trench humbles every person who descends into it. Communication delays, crushing darkness, the knowledge that if one single bolt fails, you are gone. No rescue, no second chances, just silence. You want perspective? Forget motivational quotes. Picture yourself sitting in a titanium sphere the size of a small closet, descending for hours into blackness so complete that even your headlights are swallowed. There is no horizon, no sky, no sense of up and down, just instruments and trust. That is the trench. And yet life down there somehow continues, completely uninterested in our existential drama. Snailfish don't care about the stock markets. Amphipods don't debate politics. They endure, they adapt, they survive. In many ways, the trench is proof that life is more resilient than we are. But here's where we need to be honest, right? Resilience does have limits. Climate change is warming ocean waters and altering chemistry even at depth. Ocean acidification changes the balance of calcium carbonate. Deep sea mining companies are eyeing abyssal plains for rare earth minerals. The argument is predictable. Green technology requires lithium, cobalt, nickel. The seabed is rich, so why not harvest it? Well, because we barely understand the ecosystems we're about to bulldoze. The Mariana Trench is not a warehouse of resources waiting for extraction. It is an archive of evolution. Species down there have adapted for millions of years to hyper-specific conditions. Disturb the sediment, introduce noise pollution, alter chemistry, and you may trigger collapses we don't even have the language to describe yet. But in the race for energy independence and economic leverage, nuance gets bulldozed. The trench becomes a commodity, another asset class, another frontier to monetize. Here's my unpopular take. Just because we can reach the bottom of the ocean doesn't mean we should industrialize it. Mastery is not the same thing as wisdom. Now let's talk about symbolism for a second, because you and I both know this makes for better storytelling. The Mariana Trench is often described as the deepest point on Earth, but metaphorically, it represents the depth of our ignorance. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own ecosystems. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is funding priorities. We're fascinated by what's above us because it feels aspirational. Space is clean, sleek, and cinematic. The trench is murky, muddy, and claustrophobic. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't inspire like glossy tourism campaigns. You can't build a luxury resort 7 miles underwater. So we ignore it until it becomes useful. But imagine if the Mariana Trench was discovered today, in an age of influencers and real-time media. There would be live descent streams, sponsorship deals, submersibles branded like race cars. Maybe there already are hints of that. Exploration becomes spectacle. Science becomes content. And that's where we need to check ourselves, because the trench doesn't need branding. It needs restraint. Every expedition yields data, new species, new chemical signatures, new insights into extremophile biology. Some of those discoveries could inform medicine. Enzymes adapted to extreme pressure might inspire industrial processes. Biochemical pathways might unlock innovations. There's genuine scientific gold down there. But gold attracts miners. The trench forces a question most of us don't like asking. Is every discovery an invitation to exploit? Or can we draw a line somewhere and say, this is enough, this is sacred? I know sacred isn't a word that scientists like to use. It sounds mythical. It sounds mystical, unmeasurable. But maybe that's the part of the problem, because we've reduced the planet to spreadsheets. Forests are carbon credits. Oceans are fisheries. Trenches are just mineral deposits. What if the deepest place on Earth is valuable simply because it exists? Because it reminds us we are not in control. Because it proves there are still corners of this world that dwarf our ambition. So here's the assumption I want to shatter. The Mariana Trench is not a trophy waiting to be claimed. It's a mirror. It reflects back our priorities, our arrogance, our curiosity, and our recklessness. When we found plastic at the bottom of the ocean, that was not a scientific footnote. It was a verdict. We've reached a point where even the most inaccessible environments carry our signature. The trench is so deep that sunlight never penetrates it, yet humanity does. That should bother you. Not in some vague abstract way, but in a personal way. Because the trench is proof that out of sight, out of mind is a lie. There is no away anymore. Throw something away and the ocean currents will decide its final resting place. Sometimes that resting place is 38,000 feet down. And yet, despite all of this, I'm not pessimistic. The Mariana Trench also represents possibility. It shows that life can adapt beyond our imagination, that Earth's ecosystems are more intricate than our textbooks, that there are still mysteries left to solve. Mystery matters. In an area where algorithms predict our preferences and satellite maps on every street corner, the existence of a place we barely understand is almost comforting, isn't it? The trench resists total comprehension. It refuses to be fully known. And maybe that's healthy. Maybe humanity needs frontiers that humble rather than flatter us. Places that do not bend to branding campaigns. Depths that remind us that our species is young, temporary, and still learning. The Mariana Trench is older than any civilization. It will likely outlast ours. Plates will still continue to grind. Sediment will continue to fall like slow motion snow. Amplifiers will continue their quiet lives long after our debates over quarterly earnings fade into irrelevance. That's perspective. So when we talk about the deepest point on Earth, let's stop framing it as a conquest story. Let's frame it as a responsibility story. We have the technology to reach it. That means we also have the responsibility to protect it. Exploration without exploitation. Curiosity without colonization. Knowledge without domination. These are very uncomfortable balances to strike. They require restraint in a culture that rewards expansion. They require long-term thinking in a system addicted to short-term gains. But if there's any place that deserves that restraint, it's the Mariana Trench. Because 7 miles down, under crushing pressure and absolute darkness, Earth is still writing stories we haven't even read yet. And whether those stories continue uninterrupted or become footnotes in another chapter of environmental regret, that depends on us. If you're going to close this with anything, close it with this. The deepest place on our planet is not empty, it is not lifeless, and it is not ours. It's a reminder that even in the age of satellites and submarines, there are still depths that demand humility. And humility might be the only resource we need more than anything else. I'm Curtis. See you next time.